Good morning and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes.
And we really will try and keep it to under 22 minutes. I promise. My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me, as always, Sam Coates of Sky News. It is Wednesday, September the 11th. And today, like every weekday, we'll be telling you what is coming up ahead in British politics. We've been reading the papers, we've been watching the interviews, we've been watching the TV debate too, and digesting it all to talk you through it on this podcast right now.
And as Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily waits for its endorsement from Taylor Swift, which is surely only a matter of time. We, particularly with Bob the Cat, it feels like cats are the thing that'll get us over the line with that. So all eyes on her Instagram feed. We are going to spend a lot of this podcast telling you about how the rest of the world is going to directly impact on British politics. Look, we're going to look west to the US for the repercussions of that presidential debate, east to Ukraine, which was a focus in that debate and the focus of some massively important meetings this week. Global affairs is shifting, and that is going to have a big impact on Keir Starmer's government. Jack, what are the main things we're talking about today?
We're going to talk about last night's presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Of course, it'll be leading all the headlines this morning. We'll be talking about who won, who lost, and how it all impacts upon Britain. We'll be talking about Ukraine because David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, is joining Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, today in Kyiv, talking more about missiles. And we'll be talking about Keir Starmer, who's got PMQs, Prime Minister's questions, at lunchtime today, and he'll be talking to his party after yesterday's rather bruising, but maybe not as bruising as it might have been, vote on winter fuel allowance. And we better talk briefly about the Tories as well, Sam, because it finally happened. Mel Stride, we got there in the end, is out. We have our final four. Our four horsemen of the Tory apocalypse are headed off to Tory conference to try and slug it out for the leadership there. So lots and lots happening as Wednesdays often are busy, aren't they, in politics? But let's talk about America first, Sam, because last night's debate, maybe the only debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, we don't know yet, was a huge moment in the race. The key clips from it are leading all the bulletins this morning. You and I have been going through the tape, watching all the best bits, figuring out the best quotes about Europe. What did you make of it, Sam?
Well, it's clear that Kamala Harris went in with a very sort of clear strategy, which was to get under Donald Trump's skin in perhaps a way that I haven't seen before, and many of the US commentators I've been listening to in the last couple of hours don't seem to have heard before. It was her teasing of him about things like the size of his rallies and, you know, people leaving early from his big events because they're getting bored, leaving because of exhaustion and boredom, she teased him. That I think watching his response to that and watching him get wound up over that and watching him get angry over that, the Democrats hoping that strategy will have had an effect on swing voters that don't like to see angry Trump, that don't like to see wound up Trump. The question is whether or not that was a luff. She didn't answer all the questions, all the issues that were put to her. She didn't really account for why she seemed to have changed her views since 2019 on issues that Donald Trump said made her incredibly left-wing. But nevertheless, it does feel like Kamala Harris managed to land some blows last night, partly just by looking relaxed and sort of cocking an eyebrow at Donald Trump rather than treating some of his pronouncements overly seriously and then coming back and trying to needle him.
It struck me watching it this morning, Sam, that she played the absolute classic playbook of how you deal with a playground bully, which is you wind them up and then you laugh in their face when they get angry, and it makes them look absolutely ridiculous. And she did that to Donald Trump repeatedly last night. She'd clearly thought it through. It was telling that she deployed her killer line, or killer in Donald Trump's mind anyway, about the size of his rallies while he was trying to talk about immigration. And immigration is obviously the Democrats' weak point. It's something he should be really strong on. And just as he was launching into it, she tells him that no one goes to his rallies and they're all bored and they all leave. And he lost his mind and just started going on and on about rallies instead of going on about the key talking point. And the camera, you can see Kamala Harris on the other side just laughing at him. And the imagery for Americans watching that is really bad for Donald Trump, and every Republican watching that knew that. They wanted him to stay on message. They wanted him to go after Kamala Harris and try and link her to Joe Biden. Donald Trump did not do that very successfully. Instead, most of the time he was just attacking Joe Biden, and in fact at one point giving her the chance to gently point out to Donald Trump that he's not going up against Joe Biden anymore. I don't think there's any question watching it that Kamala Harris and her team will be much happier of the two with how it went. The question for me, Sam, is how much of that actually matters. Donald Trump seems so impervious to most of the normal winds of political change. You know, you think back to 2016 and the Access Hollywood tape coming out a month before the election. I mean, that should have just destroyed his campaign. He still went on and won. And so to sit here and say, well, Kamala Harris won the debate and therefore she's going to win the presidency, I am not making that link at all.
No, but what we did get, and given that this is predominantly a podcast about British politics, is a sense of the massive, massive divide, the fork in the road between the two presidencies when it comes to how they're going to deal with global affairs and the impact for Britain and our allies if one or the other walks into the White House in January. I mean, nowhere was that clearer than on Ukraine. We'll talk a bit about the British approach to Ukraine in a bit, but just looking at that debate, there was a moment where former President Trump was asked, do you believe it's in the US's best interest for Ukraine to win the war, yes or no? And he sidesteps it and basically says, I think it's in the US's best interest to get this war finished and just get it done, negotiate a deal, because we have to stop all these lives from being destroyed. I'll do that. I'll get it settled even before I become president. Now, that is a massive statement that's going to have impacts on strategy in Moscow, in Kyiv, if President Trump gets re-elected, and in London, because it suggests that Donald Trump will look for an early end to the war, presumably at some cost to Ukraine and some benefit to Moscow. In this debate, Trump was making play for how I know Putin very well, was what he said, and how he was nervous about Putin reaching for nuclear weapons, while Kamala Harris took the other approach. She was warning about any success for Putin will mean him sitting in Kyiv, the Ukraine capital, with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. So a very different view of why the Ukraine war matters was on stark display in that debate.
Absolutely agree with that. And also debate too about trade and tariffs, which is obviously something that will impact hugely here in Europe and did during the last Trump presidency. And Donald Trump really doubling down on this idea of higher tariffs, not just for China, but for everyone wanting to sell goods into the US, which would have a massive impact on us here in the UK, our biggest single trading partner being the US. There is no sign of him stepping away from that policy. I mean, again, with Donald Trump, you sort of have to take everything with a pinch of salt. Things he says when he's effectively in opposition, are they actually things he would do in presidency? I mean, often when he was president, he would say he was going to do things, and then the next day he would say exactly the opposite. So it's hard to be sure, but he certainly wasn't backing away from this idea of much bigger general tariffs on US imports, and the impact that would have on the British economy, not to mention the broader European economy, is significant. Maybe we lead to some sort of tariff response, tariff trade wars, who knows. Certainly not something Kamala Harris is talking about doing. And I think it just shows again, Sam, exactly as you do, that this is a fork in the road election, that this, you look at the polling, it is on such a knife edge between these two people. It really is going to come down to a very, very small number of votes in November who wins this. Yet the different outcomes for us here in Europe are colossal. They could hardly be more stark, and that was totally on display last night.
If Donald Trump goes ahead and doubles the tariff rate on goods coming into the US to 20%. I mean, you can kiss goodbye to any UK-US trade deal. I mean, trade deals are about, tariff reduction. That would set back any chance of that happening, I think, quite considerably. So that will be something that they'll be looking at nervously if indeed trade deals remain a priority of the Starmer government, and they seem reluctant to renegotiate the existing ones, but we're a little hazy about the level of priority they attach to new ones. But there is, even if Harris is elected, a sense from last night's debate that London will have to adjust to of greater US focus on itself. there were comments from Kamala Harris about Afghanistan, and she praised Joe Biden's decision to pull out of Afghanistan, building on the deal that Trump had done, because, quote unquote, we were paying for that endless war. And I think that the signal that she's sending is a bit, not totally dissimilar to Donald Trump, a desire that to signal to the American people that if she too becomes president, she knows that foreign wars are unpopular domestically, and her inclination isn't to go for that. So there's a lot in this debate. I just want very quickly to talk just for a second about the links between Labour and the Democrats. I've been just talking to people in the UK about this. There is no doubt of a fondness, and we'll see this on Friday when Keir Starmer goes to see Joe Biden, for the Democrats, and you saw a delegation go to Democrat National Convention in August. But there is there is a bit of a feeling that some of the links between the UK Labour Party and the formal help between the UK Labour Party and the Democrats is being a bit overdone. Stories at the weekend about Deborah Mattinson, Starmer's pollster, going over to the US are true, but as one person pointed out, that's to go and address effectively the US equivalent of the IPPR, a left-wing think tank, rather than to formally work for the Harris campaign. And while some of the digital stuff the US will be interested in, I was talking to one person involved in that, they don't think that they're going to have any impact on the US campaign beyond a sort of cursory show and tell of what they've been doing. So I've certainly got people slightly starting to play down the links between the two political parties.
And they're probably doing that because they think Donald Trump might win. I don't know. I think Kamala Harris is picking up a lot of UK Labour's talking points, and I think you can draw quite a clear line between the strategies she's now running and the one that Keir Starmer ran, with a few significant differences. The sort of optimism and joy and hope thing that Kamala Harris is going big on, it certainly does not appear to be in the Keir Starmer playbook. Certainly not now he's in government, and that is something that's been well commented upon here. But I do think the Democrats are looking around the world at where you can find centre-left oppositions and governments winning and doing well in the polls, and there ain't many places to look at the moment beyond Britain. We better talk about foreign affairs, Sam, because we haven't got too much time left. The Foreign Secretary David Lammy and the US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken are in Kyiv today, having had nice, friendly, cosy talks here in London yesterday, and we saw a press conference at the Foreign Office yesterday. They're now going to be in Ukraine today, and they are going to be talking about long-range missiles. And this story has gone right to the top of the news agenda here in the UK, because we've got the Times and the Telegraph both having front-page stories today suggesting that the US is now on the brink of agreeing to allow Ukraine to fire long-range missiles handed to them by Britain and America into Russian territory for the first time, which would be a big and significant shift and a big moment in this war, and will put Russia much more on the back foot, certainly around its border areas, than it has been so far. We don't know for sure that this is going to happen, but the reporting seems to suggest that it is now getting close to a decision being made. It could come as soon as this week. It could come this month ahead of the UN General Assembly. But it's something that Ukraine has been pushing very, very hard for, and it looks like we might be getting there.
This is a strange story. So the background to this is the UK and the US and France have been supplying Ukraine with weaponry that has the capacity to fire deep into Russian territory, but effectively Ukraine hasn't had the permission from its allies to do so. Now, back in July, Keir Starmer seemed to signal that he was completely content with these weapons being used for long-range incursions into Russian territory. But then it turned out that the US weren't as comfortable and were effectively being a bloc. But why should UK weapons be stopped being fired into Ukraine as a result of US views? Well, it seems to be not because of a legal bar, but because Britain just thinks that we can't really act independently. And we do need US radar and other military assistance to support these long-range weapons. So we effectively paused that permission too. Now, as you say, the UK paper's going very, very hard on the idea that the US are going to change their position, particularly after Iran gave a whole load of weaponry to Russia in the last week or so. But I've been reading the Washington papers in the last 48 hours, and they say the US Defense Secretary still remains unconvinced. The US weaponry, President Biden hasn't yet changed his mind. The decision might come, but that skepticism that the US have that this could escalate the war possibly into something nuclear doesn't look from the US papers like it's gone away, even if there's lots of anticipation on the UK side.
There's certainly some in the UK government now who believe the US is about to change its position, and I think that's where these stories are coming from. It's also worth noting a story on I would say this, wouldn't I, Politico.com, our DC site, which has spoken to several senior members of US Congress who've been talking to Anthony Blinken, and they say they think he's about to change his mind, and they may have been relayed information that someone like Blinken is not yet prepared to say in public. But as you say, this doesn't seem definite, but it would be a big moment. It would change the dynamic, I think, of how Russia is able to attack Ukraine. The theory is that they would have to pull back some of their key weaponry further inside Russia to protect it, and that would restrict their ability to put further incursions into Ukraine. The worry in America, of course, has always been about escalation. If we start giving Ukraine these very long-range, powerful missiles to start firing at Russia, that just takes the war onto another level. And of course, the fear is of an escalating conflict that ends up in something absolutely unimaginable like nuclear war. And it's sort of baby steps in this direction, but it feels like we're getting there.
Right, 3 minutes to do absolutely everything else. Keir Starmer up at PMQs today after that vote yesterday that saw 348 of Labour's 404 Labour MPs basically back the winter fuel payment cut. That leaves the other 52 abstentions. And of course, one Labour MP, John Trickett, who has the whip, voted against. Of those 52, Labour claim that all but 12 of them had permission to leave, but quite clearly, quite a lot of those who had permission to leave were encouraged to vacate Parliament so they didn't do something more drastic, because a lot of them are on record uncomfortable with the winter fuel allowance cuts. On one level, a decisive result. On another level, behind the scenes, I feel like Labour is licking its wounds almost more than the numbers would suggest they need to.
Yeah, I think the story of this parliament is going to be this. There's going to be Labour rebellions of different magnitudes on all sorts of issues as Keir Starmer takes what he calls quote-unquote difficult decisions. And he's still going to win these votes given the size of his majority. And the question is really, how much does that matter? How much does it really impact on the Labour leadership? And how much does this cut through in the country? Like, how much do people notice that their, shiny new government that they've just voted in are actually quite divided on lots of things, and people don't like divided parties? And does that start to impact on how people see them? Not to mention, how does the unpopular policies like taking money away from old people also going to impact on their poll ratings? And that sort of remains to be seen, but the signs so far for Labour are not brilliant. Keir Starmer's poll ratings are plummeting, but it's early days, and that's often the case for incumbents. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to have a problem at the next election, which is the thing that they'll really care about in Labour HQ.
What we don't know yet are the kinds of things that trigger Keir Starmer into changing course. We don't know whether it's public opinion, whether it's a certain type of MP or a certain number of MPs, pressure from the union. We don't know. We got very used to working out what would impact on a Tory Prime Minister. We're still at the foothills of working that out for Labour. There is a thing around which Labour MPs can unite today. That's the renter reform bill that the Tories drew up, but were never able to get through Parliament, partly because of the number of landlords in Parliament. That will introduce no-fault evictions, a ban on rental bidding wars and limiting rent rises to once a year. That's being introduced in the Commons today. And I think that gets a broad base of support from Labour MPs. So I'll be much happier to be talking about and voting in favour of that. Should we talk about the Tories in the last 45 seconds? Kemi Badenoch felt like the big winner?
Yeah, Kemi Badenoch came out well out of that. If she'd have done badly, I think people would have been writing her off at this point. That's definitely not the case. She's still in the race, and there's still a lot of votes to hoover up when we go down from these final four candidates to the last two. The interesting thing now to watch for, Sam, is what is the dynamic going to be like between these four? I cannot wait for Tory conference in Birmingham. I can't wait to see these four strutting it on the stage and seeing how many barb digs there are at each other and little briefings afterwards. The Tories are not a happy ship at the moment, and I don't think that this leadership contest is going to paint them in the best possible light.
Kemi Badenoch's team warning centrist Tory MPs that supporting any other candidate will ensure a Robert Jenrick victory. This can only get nastier. I think that's all we've got time for. That's the alarm. We will see you back at this time tomorrow.
Thanks very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Cheers, bye.